Good afternoon, everyone. Carahsoft Technology would like to welcome you to our AWS, Bonterra, and Carahsoft Impact Reporting Unlocked Proven Strategies for Nonprofit Leaders to Drive Change and Secure More Funding webinar. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers, Tracy Vanderneck, Personal Fundraising Coach at Bonterra, and Kelly Heck, Executive Advisor at Amazon Web Services, to kick off our webinar.
Thank you, Caroline and Carahsoft, for bringing us all together today to talk about impact reporting and how nonprofit leaders can use impact reporting to drive change and to secure more funding. I thought we should introduce ourselves so you know who you're spending a bit of your afternoon with. Kelly, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Hecht, and I get to serve in the role of an executive advisor for Amazon Web Services. I specifically focus on the global healthcare and nonprofit sector, which is the area I have spent the bulk of my career serving and practicing. I am based in New York City, and I'm really excited to dive into this topic with Tracy and all of you because I think it's a really important area of focus and one that doesn't often get enough attention in these types of forums. So thanks to Carahsoft and Bonterra for inviting me and us to be part of this conversation today.
Great, thanks, Kelly. My name is Tracy Vanderneck, and I am a personal fundraising coach with Bonterra. As many of you know, Bonterra builds the tools and technology that empower nonprofits and the public sector agencies to provide stronger services, to streamline operations, and to prove the impact of their programs. When I'm not coaching nonprofits with Bonterra, I also work directly with nonprofit organizations to help improve both their fundraising and board governance. I'm a regular contributor to Nonprofit Pro, and I am the author of the 60-minute guide to building the infrastructure for successful nonprofit fundraising. So that is us. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll talk about the challenges associated with impact reporting, as well as strategies that can help strengthen your reporting at your organization. We'll leave a short time at the end for Kelly and myself for a question and answer session. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section or the chat box, whichever, and we will try and answer as many as we can at the end. After the session, you'll receive emails that include a video of this session, as well as tools from both Bonterra and AWS that you can use at your own organization. So let's go ahead and get started. Impact reporting can be seen as a little bit challenging. So what is the current challenge? Impact reporting can sometimes seem like an idea that is far removed from the everyday work of a nonprofit organization. But in truth, the components of impact reporting are actually infused at every level of everything that you do. The challenge is to harness and organize all of the variables into tools that can work for you. Since there are a lot of different types and sizes of nonprofits on this session today, I'd like to make sure that we're all on the same page about what impact reporting is. It's an understanding of how to collect, measure, and share data and progress and outcomes that can be used in all types of decision making. Impact reporting is an in-depth, transparent, and reliable way of reporting. That is often related to social impact projects. It is used in other areas too, of course, but social impact projects have seen solid advancements in impact reporting to further their missions. The need for programs and services offered by the independent sector is continually growing. At the same time, the ways that that work is funded is sometimes becoming more complex. If the need is increasing and it's getting more difficult to secure funding, nonprofits, we have to do more to ensure that we're working in the right areas, measuring the right things, and making sure that you're able to show funders and others that what you are doing at your nonprofit is working. You need to be able to make the case for the work that your nonprofit is doing. In this case, it's not just making the case to your funders, but also your community as a whole and to the people on your teams. So why does impact reporting matter? The nonprofit sector is evolving in the way that it determines if what it's doing is working or if something needs to be adjusted. And what I mean by that is, for a long time, for grant applications and other reporting, nonprofits simply tracked how many people they served, how many people walked through the door. But now we know that we have to look deeper than that. We have to be able to show the positive change that came about because of the services that that person received after they came through the door. It's not just about showing up, it's about what change came from showing up. So if nonprofits are to identify those positive outcomes, we must collect data on the front end from the community, excuse me, from the community to determine what the needs are and what products and services are the most likely to address those needs. The way we get there, the way we strategically plan decisions about what services and programs to offer, how we gauge success, and how we communicate to stakeholders at every level is all a part of that process. Once we're delivering services, we must collect and analyze data to see if what we're doing is in fact working on a fundamental level. Then we have to have the conviction to make changes and adjustments as necessary based on what the data is telling us. And lastly, just another small challenge is that people receive information differently now than in the past. It's not only the content of the data and the information that has changed, but it's how we show that information that has to become much more succinct. Let's look at a few things that contribute to good impact and good impact reporting. The first is that it's community driven. The nonprofit sector as a whole over the last few years has done some self-reflection as part of the evolution that I mentioned earlier on the last slide. In many cases, we've realized that the industry has realized that it needed input from more varied sources to determine what needs truly are. We're slowly moving away from the model where decisions were often made by small groups of people, potentially a board of directors, as an example, without the appropriate or ideal input from people with lived experience, subject matter expertise, people who have depth of community knowledge, and other such communal knowledge. I'm not saying that always happened, that decisions were always made in a bit of a vacuum that way, just that as an industry, we're more aware of that fact now, and that it sometimes happens, and that the more open we are to input, the more appropriate and exceptional our programs and services can be. And the more we help to address core issues before those issues branch out into even bigger problems. So that's why community driven. Next, impact reporting also has clearly defined goals. So better impact reporting involves clearly defined goals. The goals come at every level, from the organization's strategic plan down to the time where the paid staff sit down as a team and define what the desired outcomes for data collection are to ensure alignment with organizational mission and program outcomes. Consistent metrics are also important. We must standardize metrics across programs to ensure comparability and clarity in data analysis. Defining organization-wide data points that need to be collected first, and then we do the same at the program level. What are we looking at? What are we defining first at organization, then at the program? Then we find out from the program teams what should appropriately be tracked and measured. And measured is the key word here. To help you from tracking a lot of unnecessary data points, this is likely the time also where you will be defining metrics and determining what constitutes success, that you will consider how to account for variables. When you're defining how you consider success, that is the point where you will consider how you account for variables such as unequal barriers to entry and to success. If you are evaluating data on the experience of, say, 100 people, and 75 of those people have an average of 3 barriers to success or barriers to entry to whatever the issue or problem is, such as those barriers may be education level achieved, lack of transportation, learning disabilities, etc. It could be any number of things. And then 25 of those 100 people may have as many as 10 barriers to success. So this is the time where you will determine how to adjust your impact recording mechanisms to account for that wide disparity in clients. Success for everyone will not be the same. Therefore, success metrics will not be the same across the board. Next, we look at team buy-in. It definitely behooves us to provide training on data collection methods, tools, best practices to build data literacy and ensure that all of your staff understand the importance of accurate data. You can make it real to them by showing them how it can improve their daily interactions with clients. And you'll want to implement regular checks to ensure data accuracy and completeness. Encourage staff and clients to report discrepancies to you so that you can maintain positive data integrity. Last, impact reporting is an iterative process. It regularly assesses the effectiveness of data collection methods, and it makes adjustments based on feedback and changing organizational needs. Ensure that the data that you collect and the tools and technology can adapt as your program adapts and as your organization changes and is learning new things. If we're continually offering a service, we absolutely need to know why. Why do we keep offering this service? Is it the right service? Is it doing what it needs to do? Is it addressing the appropriate issue? And if through impact reporting, we find that any of those answers are no, we must adjust. We cannot be so risk averse that we continue to do the same thing year after year because it is what we know and it is what our boards and our organizations are comfortable with. Impact reporting, who's it for? Let's take a look at that briefly. Impact reporting, it's based on data. Kelly is going to share a little bit more about that in a bit. But first, let's look at specifically what is it for and what are we trying to achieve? It is for informed decision making. Data helps nonprofits understand their impact, identify areas for improvement, and make informed decisions about programs and initiatives. Program evaluation is collecting and analyzing data that allows nonprofits to evaluate the success of their programs, helping them to refine strategies and improve outcomes for their beneficiaries. Impact reporting also helps you target services. Data enables nonprofits to identify the needs of their communities more accurately, allowing them to tailor their services to address very specific issues effectively. And data allows for or enhances operational efficiency. Analyzing data can help organizations streamline operations, reduce costs, and improve overall effectiveness. So those are sort of all internal type things we just talked about. A few that touch more externally would be fundraising and grants. Donors and grant-making organizations often require data to assess an organization's effectiveness and stability. Good data can strengthen a funding proposal and can demonstrate accountability. Another external benefit that data can help is storytelling. Data can enhance storytelling efforts, providing concrete evidence of a nonprofit's impact, which can resonate more with supporters and stakeholders. Notice I didn't say it can, notice I say it can enhance storytelling. That doesn't mean we just want to throw numbers out there at our potential supporters. Here's an annual report with tons of numbers. No, what we want to do is use the data to strengthen the case for our missions, to strengthen the stories that we're telling. Data is also used in advocacy awareness. Data supports advocacy efforts by providing the evidence needed to raise awareness about specific issues and potentially influence policy change. And then with the community, being able to use impact reporting to share processes, outcomes, and impact with the community will help them, the community, understand what you've been doing, offer them a chance to be part of the continuous feedback loop we talked about earlier that ensures we're always working in the right area with the best goals and objectives. And then before we go over to Kelly, I'm just going to wrap up with just a little bit about why impact reporting can be difficult. All the challenges faced regarding impact reporting can differ based on this organization's type, size, and organizational maturity. Small nonprofit organizations often face challenges related to data collection, like having the appropriate technology, data literacy skills among their staff, time and resource constraints, and other funder system mandates where a funder requires that you use and do something specific for them. Overcoming these challenges often requires strategic planning, capacity building efforts, and sometimes partnerships with organizations that can offer expertise and resources. Large nonprofit organizations also face a range of challenges related to data collection and data silos. They have a lot of data, but it tends to be departmentalized and compartmentalized into data silos. So that adds complexity to data management. It adds complexity to evaluation and potentially in compliance and security of data. Addressing these challenges often involves a commitment to building a strong data culture, investing in technology, and fostering collaboration across departments. And for organizations that work with partner agencies, it can also be challenging to identify and report on collective impact. So now that we've talked about the challenges and some of the things that might be difficult for people, let's pass it over to Kelly to get into how data impact really affects us in nonprofits and how the data works. Kelly?
Thanks so much. I'm really struck by this particular conversation because what I find fascinating is to think about how long I've been in this sector, right? And to think about exactly where and how long we've been talking about some of these challenges, right? It's really amazing when you stop and think about the fact that a lot of this is not new. It's things that candidly we've been struggling with and thinking about and trying to solve for the better part of 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how long you've been in it. Which really begs the question, if we know that we've needed to do this, and many of us have even taken stabs at trying to do it well, right? Why has it been so elusive? And why has it been something that we still don't always feel like we've hit the right mark with, or that our funders or our donors or our boards are satisfied with? And so what you're going to find is perhaps a little bit of a different focus than you may have expected. And hopefully it'll be one that you celebrate. Bonterra and AWS, of course, offer technical solutions to these problems, and we'll get to that at the end. But if it were as simple as the technical solutions themselves, we would have already solved for this. We'd be in a very different place as an industry, and we'd be approaching this work very differently. So what we're actually going to talk about today are some of the deeper levels, maybe the mid-level, around some of the things that have been standing in our way. And we're going to offer some very practical solutions and approaches on how to dive into them. So I will forewarn you, this is going to be an opportunity to sort of get engaged and get into your chat or your Q&A section. And so hopefully you've had a little afternoon jolt of sugar or coffee, and you're going to be ready to participate in that. So to kick us off, just in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, drop in if you have used one, two, or all three of these things. And what I mean by these things are, if you have ever used Amazon Prime, or if you're an Amazon Prime member, that would be one. If you own a Kindle or someone in your home owns a Kindle, that would be two. And if you've ever used the Just Walk Out technology from a store or some other sort of facility, that would be three. So just drop in here. Have you used one, two, or all three of these? And this may seem like an odd question to ask at this particular moment, because what does it really matter how many of these I've used? What does this have to do with impact reporting, right? But the reality is all three of these innovations or realities in our world today were brought to you as a result of something that Amazon uses called working backwards. And it's a process and a methodology that you may have heard of before. And so if you haven't, I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. If you have heard of this before, you'll get a deeper exposure to it. But working backwards is a practice and a behavior that is a renowned, what we call, mechanism at Amazon. And it's sort of a form of design thinking. So you may have experienced different forms of design thinking in different workshops and programs in the past. This is the one that Amazon has used since its inception. And is really a sort of backbone to how the company innovates today. And the working backward process was actually how those three innovations came to pass. Prime was developed through a working backwards mechanism and session, as was the Kindle, as was the Just Walk Out technology. So the reason that we decided to bring this thinking and approach to bear for the conversation today is because I started my career as a frontline fundraiser in the American Cancer Society. I spent 13 years consulting with hundreds and hundreds of organizations with different missions and different sizes and different budgets and capabilities. And I've gotten to benefit from using lots of different platforms and tools, right? And as I mentioned, the challenges have still existed. And so when I came to Amazon and I started to learn about the way that they conduct the business, the way they think about innovation, I started to look for areas where I could connect the dots. Things that I see the company doing that, when adopted or even in some cases adapted, might apply new and different thinking, approach, methodologies to the world that I have lived in for 25 years, which is the nonprofit sector. And I think there's a lot in this that will feel different and maybe even sometimes uncomfortable, and that's okay, to how we think about solving for some of the problems related to impact reporting, so that we can, in fact, then get to a better place and use the tools and technology a little bit more effectively. So let me start with some grounding information. So working backwards, as I mentioned, it's sort of a process, a methodology, and it's used to get clarity. It is not used to document what we've already decided. And so what I mean by that is when you think about working backwards, you want to think about it through one of the words that Tracy used earlier. It's iterative. It's something that's going to provide discussion. It's going to provide debate. It's going to ultimately get you to a better place of clarity, but it is certainly not going to start there. And so it's something that's really important to think about when you start to put yourself into this sort of new mind space, because we really often come to our work with a sense of what needs to be accomplished. And I would say one of our greatest gifts as nonprofit leaders is our ability to solution. And we're incredibly effective at it because we've often been under-resourced and challenged with really significant problems that have not been solved for before. And so as a result, we've become really good at solving problems and solutioning. In this particular case, we actually sort of want to resist that natural temptation and urge to jump into the solution. And what we're going to think about a little bit is, what is the problem? What is the issue? What is the opportunity? And so in doing that, the working backwards process really starts with these inputs. These inputs can be everything from data to opinion to experience to feedback. It often is a blend of qualitative and quantitative information. And those inputs all come together, sometimes at the same time, sometimes again, they sort of layer in on top of each other. And then we use this tool called working backwards to ultimately drive adoption, which we constantly inspect. And by inspect, I mean question, reevaluate, think through. And in doing that, it starts to provide new and different outputs. And so one of the examples I like to use here is oftentimes people will say, we'll talk about doing some data analysis and they'll say, we've already done data analysis. We've done it with this partner, or we did it with this particular group. And that's great, and that's true. But in a working backwards process, because you're bringing new inputs in, and oftentimes the new inputs is the uncertainty, the dialogue, the debate, the discourse, that is ultimately what leads to the different output. So when you think about this, really think about it from the perspective of using this as a way to drive conversation in the process and journey of getting clarity. If you find when you start to practice this that you are writing down something that you are certain of, use that as a red flag to sort of pause yourself, check one another when you're in the room together doing it, and think about really how you allow this to be more of a journey towards clarity rather than a documentation of certainty. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to a couple of the things that we use when we're doing this. The first is a series of 5 questions. And what I find really fascinating about this is that these same 5 questions are used no matter what the problem, no matter what the company, no matter who the customer is. We don't have different questions for the commercial industry or the nonprofit industry. We don't have a set of questions for finance and a different set of questions for fashion. These are the core aspects which have been tested and refined over many, many years that have uncovered the ability to really drive towards that input variable that we were just talking about. So I'm going to read through them and then I'm going to give you a couple adaptations to think about as you're doing them. The first is to decide who actually is your constituent or the customer that you're going to be focusing on. If you know Amazon at all, they're known for their leadership principles. The number one principle is customer obsession. And what we mean by that is the person who benefits from what we bring to bear. So whether you want to call them a constituent, a supporter, a customer, a donor, totally up to you how you name them. But when you think about who they are, this is an opportunity to get really specific. You want to drill down into every little last unique, beautiful detail you possibly can, such that by the end, oftentimes the constituent or customer has a name. or they sort of have a visual identity that you can imagine. Think about things like hobbies. Think about things like where they live. Do they drive a car? What kind of car do they drive? Where do they go to school? Do they have kids? How old are those kids? There really is not too much level of detail. And what you'll often find with this is that one of the variables of input that this generates is our desire to sometimes be general in how we think about an audience or community. We sometimes try to cast a really broad net. And in doing that, we make a lot of assumptions and we create a lot of generalizations. In this particular practice, we want to get really specific around who is the person that we're talking about. Once we have that real visual strong connection and identity to who our constituent is, we want to start to think about what's the problem or opportunity that we are addressing for that particular person. What is it a problem or an opportunity? First of all, we can sort of start there. And then when we think about that, really, again, trying to get super detailed around what that is. When does it show up for them? Is it happen in the morning? Does it happen at night? Does it happen anytime? Are they alone when it happens? Again, you're going to hear me say this a lot. There is no such thing as too much richness in the way that you think about defining either the problem or the opportunity. These first two bullets usually have the most discussion and debate. And they also usually benefit from a thing that I like to use called a challenger in the room, which is someone who doesn't do as much contributing as they do watching and monitoring to make sure that everyone's really pushing themselves as fully as they can in the conversation. So your challenger's sort of job is to make sure that you guys don't take it too easy on yourselves. So once you know who your constituent is and the problem or opportunity that you're trying to solve for, then you really harness in on what is the most important benefit. So when I've solved the challenge that Tracy experiences, right, and there's probably multiple benefits for Tracy as my sample constituent in that case, what is the number one thing that Tracy cares about in that moment? What is the single benefit that is going to make the greatest impact and difference in her world? What you'll often find is this to create some debate, and you get into the why. Why do we think that that's beneficial to Tracy? Now, don't be surprised when you start to hit number 3, if this then brings you back to reshape some of the detail around who your constituent is or what the opportunity or problem is that you're trying to solve for. Because with each of these questions, you start to uncover more and more and more. Remember, we're on a journey towards clarity, which means each layer might sort of bring us a half a step back to bring some more specificity to that. Question number 4 is then sort of a check-in. How do we know that? How do we know that that's what our customer wants or needs? What information has defined that for us? Are we thinking broadly enough? Have we tried to get additional information to challenge or validate that? And then finally, where we land is, what does that end experience look like? Okay. So once we've defined who they are, what we're trying to solve for, what's the most important thing? Are we sure we've looked in all the right places to confirm that that's it? And now we have our final beautiful future state destination of something that is different in the world, an experience, a program, a product, an offering, something, right? Because we have answered all these questions. And if you remember, the title of this particular mechanism is working backwards. So now that we've hit number 5 and we know what that future experience is, and we have all this great rich detail that's led us to that, that experience is what we will then work backwards for in defining. And so these, again, are the 5 questions that lead you through that process of getting really clear on the future state that you want to achieve and will allow you to work backwards from it. Now, if you've done any Googling on this, if you've ever done a working backwards session with a member of the Amazon team, you will also know that when we do it, we have the benefit of adding a couple additional layers to it. The very first thing we do once we've defined and answered these 5 questions is a press release. And the press release is to announce that future state. So you can imagine many, many years ago when online giving was first launching, right? If our journey had been that we were creating a seamless user experience where a donor could make a donation from anywhere in the world but the touch of a button through their computer or their phone, right? The press release would be announcing that, right? My organization is thrilled to announce that today donors from, all over the world will be able to, et cetera, et cetera. And the FAQ is then you anticipate all the questions that may come from that press release. You put yourself in the shoes of anyone who might be interested in, curious about, or benefit from the experience that you've just defined. And you start to think about the questions. Now, again, to warn you, when you start to dive into the FAQ in particular, you will also find that it sometimes brings you back to those questions that you started with. So this is why I said, don't worry too much if you find yourself feeling a little bit like you're in a messy process. That's part of the beauty of it. That uncertainty allows that clarity to really come forward. And finally, when we do it, we like to have some fun little visuals that we add. And that's because, as Tracy mentioned, lots of people consume information differently. So now that you sort of understand the grounding of it, I do want to offer a couple different lenses by which to think about where you start in this process. So certainly there is, of course, the ability to think about this from the perspective of a funder. And let's just start for a minute with a commercial funder. Let's say that you've received a grant and part of your grant funding requires you to provide rich data about the impact of that funding. So you might think in this particular case that your constituent or your customer is the funder of your grant. And you might then be able to use the richness of what the terms of that gift were as a way to guide some of this thinking. That is one way to approach this and certainly would add great benefit. You also could think of it through the lens of an individual funder, right? An individual donor or a cohort of donors, someone who gives through mail, or maybe it's a major gift cohort. And you could answer the same questions. But wouldn't it be interesting to see how different those answers are if you were thinking about it through the lens of a commercial funder who provided you with grant funding versus a group of major donors who had given you individual contributions from their personal capacity? So gives you sort of an example. You could also think about it actually from the perspective of your staff, your internal employees and colleagues. Who and what do they need as it relates to impact reporting? Think about impact reporting as one of the true matrix deliverables of our industry. When we are doing it well, we are pulling on data from so many different areas of our work. We're talking about operational efficiency and how we were responsible with the dollars to have the greatest possible impact on dollars to mission. We're talking about marketing and how many impressions we were able to get to send our message out. We're talking about program recipients and how many lives were touched and changed because of the work we did. So it can be really valuable to use the same working backwards methodology as you think about how impact reporting is conducted, where the constituent or customer are actually your colleagues internally within your organization. So I share this all so that you can sort of see the versatility of using this type of tool. And I'm only focusing within the world of impact reporting, where there's many, many other areas we could certainly explore today. But knowing how complicated and elusive this has been over the years, hopefully this gives you some of that information to dive into. Okay, so a couple more things before we turn it back to you guys for some questions and answers. Some other tools that we use, and we use these both in the working backwards process as well as just generally in conversation. Oftentimes when we are faced with a decision, it is helpful to imagine if that decision represents something that is a one-way door or a two-way door. And here's what I mean by that. A one-way door opens and closes, and that's the end, right? A two-way door, you can come in and out of as many times as you want. So when I align that with a decision, if I'm making a one-way door decision, it means it's pretty hard to undo. Okay. An example there might be, I'm going to switch the CRM I use to ensure better impact reporting. That's a one-way door decision. That's a big investment of time, resource, energy in order to do that, right? A two-way door decision might be, I'm going to try a new tool to see if it enables my impact reporting more seamlessly, right? That's something that I can test and try without it being as big a lift. Most decisions that we're making are actually around process, people, how we're doing things day to day. And what we found in using this with nonprofit organizations is most of our decisions are two-way door decisions, which means we can sort of calm the energy around the intensity with which right or wrong exists, and instead use a little bit more bias for action and how we make progress in testing and learning. And if it turns out to have been the wrong decision or turns out to have not worked in the way we wanted, good news, it was two-way door. So we can go ahead and walk back through and make another decision on the way back next time. The second thing that we use as sort of an analogy is this concept of a two-pizza team. And by that, we mean a team that is the size that you could feed with two pizzas. So generally speaking, it has about 6 to 10 people on it. And we do that to prevent the great euphemism of sort of dogpiling, right? Where everybody has to be involved and everybody's voice needs to be there. That's beneficial and great in a lot of ways. And we certainly want to be sure that our two pizza team has proper representation from both a skill, a perspective, and a diversity lens. However, this allows for a ownership and autonomy, which really helps us move faster in making decisions. A two pizza team is agile and quick. It really can drive innovation at a pace that's necessary in today's world. They can be effective at determining if something is a one-way or a two-way door. And if it's a one-way door, they can pause and go back and engage more people in the conversation. If it's a two-way door, let's get moving forward and see if we can start to make some progress. So as you think about how you're moving forward through those 5 questions, you think about how then you're doing your FAQ, think about trying to support this application in the way that you do impact reporting with a two pizza team that will allow you greater speed, agility, and effectiveness in the way that you move forward in doing this great work. Okay, so let's have everyone grab a pen and paper, whatever you like to use. If you like to type online, go for that. And start to think about the fact that if your team is providing timely and accurate impact metrics while investing less than half the time, okay? Imagine that that's sort of the challenge and opportunity that we're starting to play with. In this work, do you want to focus on the constituent or the customer, and who do you want to define in that moment? Just take a minute and jot down one, keeping in mind that you can always come back and do more later. And think about sort of at the high level, which of these opportunities or problems do you want to solve for first? Do you want it to be timely, right? Do you want to be more efficient by working with half the time? Start to narrow in, or maybe think of which one might be the one that you would want to dive into first. Now you're starting to and we're moving, by the way, we're moving rapid speed because we're on a webinar together, but clearly when you get into this, you're spending like an hour or more on each one. Start to think for yourself, what would be the most important benefit? Why would this be so important? Why did you pick the problem? Why did you pick the consumer? What is the real exciting benefit that you might want to add? And now, just for a second, start to think about what's informing your thinking. Did you have a conversation last week that made you think about this? Did you get a survey result back? Were you at a gala where someone said something to you? Did you lose the opportunity to get funding because of something that a funder said to you about a grant that you had submitted? Start to be aware of what's informing your thinking that's driving your answers to questions 1 through 3. And then give yourself a minute to think about what a future experience might look like and what would make you proud. What would make you excited? What would be the title of the press release that when it came out that day, you really felt like your impact in the work that you were doing day to day had been valuable in the way that you first intended when you took that position and imagined what was possible? So even though we did that rapid fire and hopefully you wrote down a couple, it should give you a sense of sort of how the flow works. It might also give you a little bit of a sense of where you got stuck. Where did a question feel harder to answer? And to just sort of be aware of that. Again, since this is a journey and not a destination, that dialogue and that awareness is going to be what really brings the value and will allow you and your two pizza team and your two-way door and one-way door decisions to really start to change the way that impact reporting is being approached and embraced with your organization so that we can start to have some more meaningful outcomes. So hopefully this was sort of a unique and different resource and tool that will allow you to think about the way that impact reporting is adopted and led within your organization. We are going to switch to Q&A, and then at the end, Tracy and I are going to share some resources that are no fee and so complimentary to help support your thinking. But it goes without saying that part of why we really focused on the challenges of the organization and the industry today and some of this thinking and methodology and practice is because the technology exists. Impact reporting from a technical perspective is quite feasible. AWS and Bonterra work together regularly on this because we're actually really strong partners in the way that we bring impact reporting to bear for nonprofits. And so we know that the technology piece is covered. That part is funny enough, the easy part. That's why today we've really focused on getting clear on the challenge and opportunity that exists in the industry and has for many, many years, and some of the thinking and methodologies and new resource that comes to bear and the way that you approach solving for it, so that when we do come together and we do start to apply the technology, that harder work has already been scratched. So with that, I'm going to invite Caroline to let us know what questions have come up. You're welcome to go ahead and drop them into the Q&A now. You're welcome to drop them into the chat. We're going to try to get as many as we can, and then we'll wrap up with some resources before we move to the end of the call together.
And I would just love to say one thing about what Kelly talked about is that nonprofits tend to be very linear beings. Our staff and our boards tend to make a plan, work it all the way through, rush to the finish line, and then they're happy that the project is finished. So Kelly's 5 questions and the feedback loops and the iterative processes are really important, I think, to educate your board and your staff about, so that we as an industry can stop thinking quite so linearly, one way door, if you will, and start thinking that it is okay to make changes based on feedback and data, so that we can be even better going forward. So just want to throw that in before Caroline takes us to some questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Kelly. We do have some questions in the chat, so I will begin. This one is not directed at anyone in particular, but could you speak to the process of integrating the benefit to the donor and the benefit to the program service recipient?
It's a great question. You want to go ahead, Tracy, and speak to that, or would you like me to dive in?
Go ahead. That one's all you.
Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting question. And I'm not sure that there's a one-size-fits-all answer to it. I think it actually would likely depend on your mission and what some of the points of intersection are relative to who your donor and who your program recipient is. So let me say what I mean by that. Oftentimes in certain missions of like mental health or individuals who are unhoused, you'll find that the donor is not necessarily first or even sometimes second degree connected to the people that the mission is impacting. And those are just 2 examples of many. So in those particular cases, it's probably not as important or essential. I do think that if you are an organization where there's healthy overlap between those things, so for example, I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I worked at American Cancer Society for many years. That's an area of great overlap. Oftentimes, someone who is directly benefiting from the services offered by the American Cancer Society also chooses to make a donation. So I think the first thing is to determine if you have that area of overlap or not. In the areas where you do have, and so let me say, if you don't have that overlap, probably not hugely important to make that integration. If you do have that area of overlap, I think it can be really beneficial. So long as you are creating equal value for contribution and benefit. One of the things that I see sometimes is unfortunate in the way that we do impact reporting is we sort of hit different levels of impact against one another, like they're competitive, as opposed to celebrating all impact, right? Big, small, frequent, infrequent. What we really want to look at is the sum of community in the way that impact is achieved. And so, what I think is so great about an impact report is when done well, it's an aggregate of impact, right? And so shining that light on how strong we are together and how much more valuable we are all able to be in the work that we do in support of a shared mission can be really great. So lots of benefit in that integration, so long as there's the overlap and so long as impact is being celebrated equally and as a community as opposed to independently.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. Our next question, it's a little bit long, so bear with me here. For our project, we're focusing on helping people in the community with their emergency plans. Here's a breakdown. Outputs, the number of people we assist in creating emergency plans. Outcomes, the number of people who end up with a completed plan. Impact, how many of those completed plans are actually put into action, helping people stay safe and independent. To achieve this, we rely on other community-based organizations to help us reach these populations. Should we measure both outputs and outcomes for both to see how well we're progressing towards our impact goals?
Kelly might have a strongly felt answer on that, but my inclination is yes, that it's important. You have to know how many you're serving to be able to then know how many of those that you served had the positive outcomes and impact. And I think having the more data you have in that way will help you then figure out where the crossover is so you can report on collective impact with your partners if you need to. Do you think any differently, Kelly?
No, I totally agree. Again, I give a lot of caveats when I speak on a environment like this because there's so much we don't know, right? About who's asking the question and what the history of the org is and so many different things. And there isn't a right or wrong in this, guys. No one person is doing it right. And there isn't, I don't even know that I love always better practices because sometimes even that can feel overwhelming. But I think the general theme is yes, we want to be showing all the impact as best we can. And that sort of euphemism of all ships rise with the tide, right? There's no better place to see that than in an impact report because it also is an opportunity to expose a group who's creating an impact in one area to areas of impact that they can also make outside of that one area. So every one of these touches is an opportunity for us to educate, engage, show value. It's not just a report, right? It's a dialogue piece. It's one of the greatest connection and engagement tools we have. And so I just think the more the better, and celebrate the richness as best as you can find it.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is this program available for US-based nonprofit with international mission?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by program, but I will say this. AWS is a global healthcare and nonprofit team. So we work with healthcare organizations and nonprofits all over the world. So from that perspective, yes. And Amazon is a global company, obviously. So the working backward methodology can be used anywhere for any type of mission or structure. I'll let Tracy speak to Bonterra in a minute, but I think the main thing to think about is, again, when you're a US-based organization serving international mission, that first question becomes really important. Who is the constituent or the customer that you're thinking about? Not always, but in some cases, what we find is that, coming back to that other question, your program recipient may be international, but your donor may be US or domestic based. So I think that's where getting that really clear definition of who is your audience, your constituent or your consumer for where you're going becomes super important. But yes, you can absolutely use, if you were asking about working backwards, methodology for that structure. Tracy, do you want to speak to Bonterra's capabilities?
Very similar in that it's a US based company that serves organizations around the world. And I agree with you that it is important to define where your clients are, the people that you serve, where are they, and then use data to determine where your supporters are, your either your volunteers, your funders, your philanthropic donors, any of those, where they are.
Yep.
Now with some of the programs, and if any of the other Bonterra staff on the call want to answer, feel free. With some of the programs, it does require, to my knowledge, a headquarters in the U.S. for the nonprofit, so that they can use the Bonterra software. That's the information that I have, but we can certainly get you, if we find out that there's a better answer than that, we can share that out with you all.
Awesome. And I know we're almost at time, but I do just want to address a couple of things that I'm seeing in both the Q&A and in the chat, which has to do with limitation of resources. And so let me just say this. Guys, take a minute to celebrate yourself. Big or small, our industry works really hard and does extraordinary work in a way that is profound. So I don't think we stop and celebrate ourselves enough. So when you happen to be one of those orgs that are what feels like under-resourced, just bring focus. I think those 5 questions, especially when you get to the benefit one, will probably help give you permission to say no to some things and yes to one thing and do it really well. And then maybe buy 2 pizzas for your very, very small / team of 2 and enjoy a lot of extra pizza for yourselves. But I really want to thank Tracy and Carahsoft for having us today. And I know we didn't get to everyone's questions. We'll follow up with you after the fact. My email is there. I realize that the links probably are not working. So when we follow up with you, we'll get you the links for the Bonterra Impact Reporting Practice Guide so you can connect with them to learn more. But you guys, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and for allowing us to try to help infuse some new energy and thinking into the work you're doing. Please do not give up on your impact reporting. It is vitally important to our industry and to your mission and to your supporters. And so we really are grateful to have thought through it with you today. Hope everyone has a safe and healthy rest of the day and week. And thank you again.